Arnold Barker was a Dutch ethnomusicologist who devoted his life to the study of India's music. He and his wife Cornelia visited the subcontinent on many occasions, in all spending over 15 years touring extensively through Ceylon, Nepal, and India. Both were musicians and often gave concerts together of European as well as Indian songs. This Schubert song, Der Musensohn, sung by Elizabeth Schumann, symbolizes the Barkis' devotion to music as they launched themselves in a career in search of the muse. In Holland and England, they studied Sanskrit and Bengali, preparing themselves for their first visit to India in 1926. Over the next 3 years, spent largely at Tagore's school in Shantiniketan, Bengal, Arnold completed his dissertation research on a Sanskrit musical treatise. He also studied Indian classical music and the songs of Tagore, as well as other folk and devotional forms. On subsequent trips, they were sometimes hosted by Maharajas, and on other occasions they stayed in tents. Traveling by station wagon, train, private car, bullock cart, and even on foot, they ferreted out hundreds of music. Here are a few extracts from Arnold's 16mm silent films. Some of them, like this one, still... After the first restudy in '84, we had acquired copies of Barker's 16mm silent films and numerous remain unidentified. Arnold also made over 1,000 audio recordings, but it's difficult to match them with the films, especially because he didn't often record and film at the same time. In 1984, Amy and I were able to follow up on one of Arnold and Corey's field trips to South India 46 years later. We didn't have copies of these films then, but I remembered some of them because I'd been Arnold's research assistant at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London back in the 50s and early 60s. We hope to find out more about these performing traditions, if indeed they were still alive.
After all, India had in the meanwhile achieved...
Still, we did have copies of his audio recordings. Armed with these and his
political independence and drastic changes had taken place in many aspects of life. Perhaps films and other mass media had destroyed the old traditions forever. Or devil dance. It's like the Kerala Teyams, but from about 100 miles further north in Karnataka.
Now this gives some idea of the problems we faced in putting the sounds with the picture, because Arnold made several different recordings of Bhuta music in the same area. Which is the right one? How do we know? We were so lucky to find Dr. Shivram Karanth, who had actually been Arnold's guide in this area in 1938. At 82, he was still full of energy and recalled many details of the Barker's visit. We also discussed this musical extract with him. Can you recognize this?
I think this will be Kangira and Abhyas.
It might be Kangira.
That is the bell. Yeah. Yes. It varies from place to place. From Puttur side is different. There was 3 or 4 people had come there, and we had it in a school square, Western School Square. Then we had it. Yeah, after this was over, we had that Panjuri. Yes, he would be the bell also. He will ring the bell. Well,
The horse is,
It is only included here to illustrate the difficulties of matching Arnold's films with his recordings.
There are many kinds of hobby horses in India. These resemble Arnold's film because they use palm fronds, but instead of solar topis, they have palm leaf mustaches. Their dance is in a very difficult talam in 14 beats, counted 3 plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2.
And made a special point of filming them in many parts of India. He even gave a paper on Indian hobby horse dances at an international conference in Mallorca, which focused on hobby horses and their spread from Western Europe to Asia. We know that horses were brought into India by the Aryans more than 3,000 years ago. The hobby was very likely one of the traditional symbols of fertility, which would account for the wide dissemination of the genre. In India, it's still often associated with weddings. This was shot in Madurai. The goggles worn by the rider are like the solar topi in the last example, a satirical comment on the old British Raj. As Arnold mentions in one of his letters, the topi was often worn by the clown. This small oboe is also noteworthy because it's evidently being replaced by the long Nagaswaram oboe.
In Madurai, we found the small oboe in Om Periyaswamy's folk dance group. While the musicians were warming up, the oboe player began to dance, just as Arnold's musicians had done. He was in his late 50s and told us that this type of oboe, which he called a saptakolai, is now played by only 3 or 4 others in the area.
Arnold also researched stick dances, which, like hobby horses, are found in many parts of Europe and all over India, ranging from Nepal. In an article published posthumously, he referred to a unique aspect of these dances, that they seem to know no barriers and were found among Hindus, Muslims, and Christians, and were performed by men, women, as well as children. Stick dances in India are undoubtedly quite old. Here they're depicted in a frieze from Hampi in the Deccan, which dates from about the 15th century. Turning to the southern states in 91 and 94, and to Gujarat and western India in 96, still following Bakhe's footsteps.
After 10 years, he was now a teenager and watched himself with some embarrassment. They showed us the edited version with great pride.
So who is this figure you think? This was a great opportunity for us to get information on Arnold Bakhe's 1938 footage of Yakshagana, since there were both scholars and performers present, and they helped us to identify the item.
So do you think the style has changed much since then?
Not much. Excepting some of the things which were very heavy up there, that sort of costume, they have been changing now.
Mm-hmm.
Now they use plastic, of course.
Can we now play?